Welcome to Mindful Moments, where we nourish your mind on the go.
That's right.
And today we're diving deep into Hampton-Side's Blood and Thunder.
Yeah, using AI narration to bring this epic story to life.
It centers on Kit Carson, the Navajo people, and the clash of cultures that really shaped the American West.
A story of survival ambition and the tragic consequences of misunderstanding.
Exactly. And our source material comes straight from the pages of Blood and Thunder itself.
We'll be using excerpts to really paint a vivid picture of this era.
And you know what? One thing that really struck me is that this story goes beyond the typical romanticized Wild West that we often see.
Absolutely. It challenges those simplistic narratives and asks us to consider the perspectives of, those who actually live through these turbulent times.
And the book really digs into Kit Carson's life.
Oh, yeah.
And it might surprise you, he was a far cry from that Hollywood archetype.
The book reveals a man shaped by his time, tracing his path from, these humble beginnings as a saddler's apprentice to becoming this legendary frontiersman. Imagine young Carson, barely 16, abandoning his apprenticeship and feeling this intense pull towards the vast expanse of the West.
Yeah, and that journey definitely wasn't easy.
Not at all.
The book highlights how Carson honed his survival skills in this really harsh environment, starting as a cook for mountain men.
Right.
Living off the land.
Exactly.
Eating bear meat. And, let's just say some pretty unconventional cuisine.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
It's where he developed that meticulous and cautious personality.
Almost superstitious.
Yeah, refusing to start projects on Fridays, believing in omens. It really makes him quite different from the typical reckless gunslinger we see in movies.
Definitely.
And I love how the book uses anecdotes and primary sources to really separate fact from fiction.
Oh, it's fascinating.
We learn that he was a man shaped by experience, constantly alert to danger.
Always aware.
Yeah. There's even this story about a writer who traveled with him, describing Carson as this man of few words, constantly observing his surroundings, always aware of his responsibility.
Right.
He even had this ritualistic way of setting up camp, positioning his saddle and rifle for instant use.
Wow.
Talk about being prepared.
It paints a picture of quiet competence.
Right, and that's where the book starts to challenge those stereotypical images.
For sure.
And while Carson's making a name for himself, the book introduces another crucial player, the Navajo people, or the Dene.
Yeah.
And they were so much more than just raiders, as some historical accounts might suggest.
Oh, absolutely. The book really emphasizes the complexity of Navajo culture.
Right.
They were skilled farmers, weavers, storytellers with a way of life so deeply intertwined with their environment.
Yeah, and their spiritual beliefs revolved around this reverence for the landscape, particularly those four sacred mountains.
Those are central to their belief system.
Yeah, it's incredible how they migrated from the harsh conditions of the North, adapting and even incorporating elements from other cultures.
It's a testament to their adaptability.
There's this one detail that stood out to me in the book, this taboo against men looking at their mothers-in-law.
Oh, that's a fascinating one.
Right.
That taboo might seem strange at first, but it actually reveals a lot about their social structure.
Really?
And this emphasis on maintaining harmony within the family unit.
Interesting.
It speaks volumes about their kinship system and the respect woven into their community.
It's a great example of how this deep dive helps uncover these hidden cultural gems that add a whole other dimension to our understanding.
Exactly.
But as we move forward, we see the stage being set for a clash of these worlds. The idea of manifest destiny starts to take hold.
And this is where things take a turn.
Right. The U.S., driven by that idea of manifest destiny, set its sights on westward expansion.
Expansion at any cost.
And New Mexico becomes this focal point.
Right in the heart of it all.
We see these key figures emerge on the American side. President Polk.
Of course.
The ambitious Senator Benton.
Right.
And explorer John C. Fremont, who maps the West.
Making expansion more feasible.
Exactly. And then there's General Kearny, who leads the U.S. military takeover of New Mexico.
And what's surprising is that the initial takeover was relatively bloodless.
Yeah, I didn't expect that.
It's a twist you don't see coming.
But that takeover sets the stage for a series of tragic events.
Oh, absolutely.
The book introduces us to Narbona, a Navajo leader who genuinely wanted peace with the newcomers.
A man of peace caught in the crossfire.
And yet, despite his peaceful intentions, he ends up being killed by American troops.
A real turning point.
It marks the beginning of this downward spiral in the relationship between the Navajo and the U.S.
It's heartbreaking.
It really highlights how even actions driven by, expansion, regardless of intentions, can have these unintended and devastating consequences.
Absolutely. Narbonne's death becomes a symbol of the misunderstandings and escalating violence that will soon unfold.
Yeah, a dark foreshadowing of what's to come.
A harbinger of the storm that's brewing. And that violence takes a truly horrific form with the Navajo Long Walk.
Oh, it's a heartbreaking chapter in this story.
It really is.
The book really brings to life this forced removal of thousands of Navajos from their ancestral lands.
Forced to march hundreds of miles to a desolate reservation at Bosque Redondo.
Yeah, the sheer scale of human tragedy is hard to grasp.
Imagine the suffering, the loss of homes, the complete upheaval of their way of life.
It's just unimaginable.
The book doesn't shy away from the brutal conditions they faced: disease, starvation.
And all because of General Carleton, the man behind this forced relocation.
Right, driven by this idea that he was somehow helping the Navajo.
By forcing them to assimilate.
It's a classic example of how good intentions, when clouded by prejudice and lack of understanding, can have horrific outcomes.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say.
Exactly, and the book does a great job of focusing on the human cost.
And the Navajo people's resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship.
It makes you wonder how they managed to hold on to their cultural identity through all of that.
Their strength is truly remarkable, but it's important to remember this isn't just a story about the past.
Right. The legacy of these events continues to resonate today.
And the book does a phenomenal job of challenging that simplistic cowboy versus Indian narrative.
Showing the complexities in humanity on both sides.
It even delves into Kit Carson's own internal conflict later in life.
As he grapples with the devastation inflicted upon Native Americans during westward expansion.
It's a reminder that history is not static.
Our understanding evolves as we confront difficult truths and strive for a more nuanced perspective.
And speaking of perspective, Blood and Thunder provides a fascinating glimpse into a period of history that's often oversimplified.
It encourages us to question our assumptions and grapple with the complexities of this pivotal moment in American history.
The book also delves into the role of the U.S. military in shaping the fate of the West, going beyond the romanticized version and revealing the inner workings of the Army during westward expansion.
We meet Stephen Watts Kearny, the meticulous colonel tasked with claiming New Mexico for the United States.
His background is an interesting study in contrasts.
Yeah, coming from a wealthy East Coast family with roots in New Jersey.
It's quite a lead from those refined beginnings to leading a group of volunteers across the unforgiving American prairie.
He studied classics at Columbia University, yet found himself navigating the chaos of the frontier.
It speaks to his adaptability and military acumen that he was able to bridge that gap.
The book emphasizes his meticulous nature and deep understanding of the prairie.
Decades of experience on the frontier had forged his discipline. He'd explored mapped, built forts and negotiated treaties.
It gave him an intimate knowledge of the land and its challenges.
Yeah, it's as if he was carrying civilization westward, imposing order on the untamed wilderness.
But as Kearny pushed towards Santa Fe, the heart of New Mexico, there was an unexpected turn of events.
Oh, what happened?
The book describes this almost comical scene where Kearny's troops encounter a rider who tells them that the Mexican governor Armijo has abandoned his defenses and fled.
Really, they were expecting a fight.
They had been prepared for a fierce battle, but it became clear that Armijo was more concerned with self-preservation than engaging in a costly conflict.
It must have been a moment of disbelief for Kearny and his men.
The book explores the reasons behind Armijo's retreat, highlighting the internal divisions and political maneuvering within the Mexican government.
So it wasn't just cowardice.
It was a calculated decision to avoid bloodshed and potentially negotiate a better outcome.
Interesting. So Kearny marches into Santa Fe, unopposed, met with a mix of curiosity and apprehension from the locals.
It's a pivotal moment marking the transfer of power from Mexico to the United States.
A real turning point.
And the book captures this transition through the eyes of Susan McGoffin, a young American woman accompanying her husband on their journey west.
Oh, I've heard of her. Her diary entries offer a unique perspective on the social dynamics and cultural clashes happening in Santa Fe.
She was the only American woman in the newly conquered capital and became this accidental socialite.
Her home was a gathering place for American soldiers longing for a taste of home and a reminder of American womanhood.
Her story adds a very human element to the historical narrative, revealing the personal experiences of those caught in the middle of these sweeping changes.
And as things settle in Santa Fe, Kit Carson comes back into the picture, fresh from his adventures with Fremont in California.
He's carrying crucial dispatches for President Polk.
This is where we see personal ambition colliding with political maneuvering.
Fremont, wanting to solidify his position in westward expansion, had tasked Carson with delivering these messages to Washington.
But there's a twist.
General Kearny, seeing Carson's skills and reputation, intercepts him and gives him a new mission to guide him back to California.
So now he's caught in the middle.
It puts Carson in a difficult position, torn between his promise to Fremont and his duty to a higher-ranking officer.
It's a clash between personal integrity and the demands of the military.
And amidst these shifting alliances, the situation with the Navajo continues to escalate.
The book describes growing tensions between them and the American military presence in New Mexico.
We see how misunderstandings and cultural differences lead to more violence. Navajo raids on settlements become more frequent, fueled by desperation and a sense of betrayal after Narbona's death.
And the American response, driven by fear and a desire for control, becomes increasingly harsh.
The book introduces James Calhoun, the new Indian agent, and Colonel John Washington, the strict military governor of New Mexico.
These two represent a more assertive and uncompromising approach to dealing with what they perceived as the Indian problem.
And this all culminates in a tragic encounter at Canyon de Chelly, a place sacred to the Navajo.
It becomes the setting for a confrontation with lasting consequences.
Colonel Washington leads an expedition into Navajo territory, supposedly to negotiate a peace treaty.
But things go wrong.
Cultural misunderstandings and simmering tensions quickly erupt into violence.
And Narbona's son-in-law, Manolito, becomes a key figure in this conflict.
He embodies the spirit of Navajo resistance, fiercely opposed to the encroachment on their ancestral lands.
The book describes this pivotal moment where Washington demands the return of a stolen horse.
It seems like a minor incident, but it escalates into a deadly confrontation.
And in the chaos, Narbona, the aging leader who had once advocated for peace, is killed by American troops.
His death becomes a rallying cry for the Navajo people, solidifying their resistance to American expansion and setting the stage for the brutal conflict that will define the years to come.
As this conflict unfolds, we begin to see the true cost of manifest destiny. The book exposes the dark underbelly of westward expansion, the violence, the displacement, the cultural annihilation.
It's a story that challenges the romanticized version of the Wild West, forcing us to confront the complex and often tragic consequences of this period in American history.
We also witness the arrival of a formidable figure on the American side, General James Henry Carleton.
Carleton comes to New Mexico with a grand vision to pacify the region and establish order.
He represents a shift toward a more systematic and ruthless approach to dealing with the Native American population.
He's a complex character driven by a mix of ambition, paternalism, and a fervent belief in the superiority of American civilization.
He envisions a future where Native Americans are assimilated, stripped of their cultural identity, and confined to reservations.
To execute this vision, he turns to Kit Carson, who's now a colonel in the Union Army.
And this is where the story takes an even darker turn, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Carleton assigns Carson to lead a brutal campaign against the Navajo, employing a scorched earth policy to crush their resistance and force them onto a reservation at Bosque Redondo.
This campaign puts Carson's morals to the test, leaving a lasting stain on his legacy.
He's torn between his duty to his commander and his growing unease with the brutality and inhumanity of this war.
And the Navajo people find themselves facing unimaginable hardships.
Their homes are destroyed, crops, burned livestock confiscated. They are driven to the brink of starvation, forced to choose between surrendering and death.
The book pulls no punches in depicting the horrific realities of this conflict. The massacres, the forced marches, the despair and suffering.
It's a stark reminder of how the idea of manifest destiny, once seen as a beacon of progress and opportunity, became a nightmare for those who stood in its path. And the conditions at Bosque Redondo, they were truly appalling. The book paints this picture of this barren landscape, the scarcity of resources, and just the widespread disease and despair that gripped the Navajo people.
It must have been such a stark contrast to their previous life. You know, the mountains, canyons, and open spaces that had defined their existence for generations.
Carleton, convinced that he was offering them salvation through forced assimilation, he tried to transform them into farmers.
But the Navajo, so deeply connected to their traditions.
They found this forced transformation incredibly demoralizing.
Their entire understanding of the world was just so different from the agrarian model that Carleton was trying to impose.
And the book details those tragic consequences: failed crops, hunger, the erosion of their traditional knowledge.
It was a brutal lesson in the failure of forced assimilation.
Carleton's experiment, though, perhaps fueled by good intentions, turned into a humanitarian disaster.
But even amidst this suffering, the Navajo spirit remained unbroken.
That's right. The book highlights this incredible resilience, this unwavering determination to maintain their cultural identity.
They found ways to adapt, resist, and hold on to their traditions, even in the most oppressive circumstances.
As the situation at Bosque Redondo worsened, even Carlton began to see the flaws in his plan.
He must have realized it wasn't working.
There's a moment in the book where Carlton, desperately trying to combat a cutworm infestation that was destroying the Navajo corn crop, he suggests hand-picking the worms from each individual husk.
Oh.
It's such an absurdly impractical suggestion
Yeah.
that it really highlights his desperation.
He was grasping at straws.
It's a turning point as the realization dawns that Bosque Redondo is failing and the Navajo people cannot be forced to abandon their way of life.
So what happened next?
Well, amidst this unfolding disaster, Kit Carson is wrestling with his own role in the tragedy.
Yeah, it must have been weighing heavily on him.
The book shows his growing disillusionment with Carlton's policies and his conflicted feelings about the war he's been ordered to wage.
It's interesting how even in the midst of such brutality, he seemed to retain a sense of empathy for the Navajo.
Then a new figure enters the scene, General William Tecumseh Sherman, the same man who would later become famous for his march to the sea during the Civil War.
Wow, talk about a historical heavyweight.
Sherman arrives with a different perspective, less focused on assimilation and more interested in a pragmatic solution.
So he was willing to consider alternatives.
He was actually willing to listen to the Navajo leaders and understand their grievances.
That seems like a significant shift in approach.
It was. He meets with Barboncito, a Navajo headman, and listens as he pleads for a return to their homeland.
What did Barboncito say?
He eloquently describes the suffering at Bosque Redondo, the failed crops, the disease, the longing for their ancestral lands.
It must have been a powerful plea.
Sherman, known for his pragmatism and his understanding of warfare, is moved by Barboncito's words.
He recognized the futility of forcing the Navajo to abandon their way of life.
Exactly. It's a moment of hope, a recognition that a different path based on understanding and respect is possible.
It sounds like a turning point for the Navajo.
It was. Thanks to Sherman's intervention, they're finally allowed to return home. In 1868, they begin the long journey back, carrying the scars of their ordeal, but also a renewed determination to rebuild and preserve their culture.
It's really a testament to their resilience and their deep connection to their land. This story of Kit Carson, the Navajo people, and this clash of cultures in the American West, it's both complex and heartbreaking.
It is.
Blood and Thunder doesn't offer easy answers. It challenges us to confront the dark side of American history, to appreciate the resilience and the cultural richness of the Navajo people, and to really question our own assumptions about this period.
It's a story that prompts us to seek a deeper understanding and to recognize the enduring power of the human spirit.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to read Blood and Thunder for a richer exploration of these events. You'll find a link to purchase the book in the show notes.
And don't forget to subscribe to the deep dive for more insightful explorations of your source material. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might be interested in the nuanced history of the American West. Until next time, keep diving deep.